de klimaatblok. And we have two sessions, parallel sessions. One session is a bigger, just here, panel discussion between XR and deel for climate on how we can combine the message of cancellation of debt with fossil subsidies. So that will be here. And then there is a workshop that's in the smaller room where the letter writing was. That's going to be a workshop on antidotes of white supremacy within our movements. That's going to be given by Jara. She's over there. So the people that want to join the workshop, you can go to the smaller room, and people that want to do the panel discussion, you can stay here. So we can.
What's the panel discussion about?
It's a panel discussion between XR and deel for climate on how to combine debt cancellation with fossil subsidies. How can that be one joint message? So you could choose what you want to do. Oh yeah, sorry. First we are going to do the music. Sorry.
Hello again.
Hallo. Ja, welkom terug iedereen. Fijn om nog heel even je plekje te vinden en heel even te landen. Muziek helpt je ook altijd, helpt mij om in mijn lichaam te komen en gewoon te verbinden. Ik ga een liedje in het Spaans zingen. Ik schrijf zelf protestnummers, maar ik geef ook workshops waarin andere mensen protestliedjes schrijven. En dit is een nummer wat uit zo'n workshop is gekomen toen ik in Bolivia was met land defenders die hun leefgebied als boeren beschermen tegen de gasindustrie. En heel dapper 5 maanden lang op een brug hebben geblokkeerd, zodat niks van infrastructuur, drugs en weet ik veel wat hun beschermde land, niet zo beschermde land, binnen zou kunnen komen. Het zijn de vrouwen uit Tarikia. En dit nummer is voor hun land defending in Bolivia. Hun stemmen. En het refrein is No se calla. En ik ga niet alle tekst vertalen, maar No se calla is don't be quiet or don't shut up. Like, spreek je uit. Escucha el silencio en la madrugada y el agua tranquila corriendo la quebrada. Mi reserva hice con tiempo y cuidado. Espero que sea bien respetado. Si quieren vivir libre para siempre, cuida el medio ambiente. Mujeres de pie, nunca de rodillas. Mujeres de pie, nunca de rodillas. Mujeres siempre firmes. Mujeres siempre firmes. Fusil, metralla, Tarikia, no se calla. Tarikia, no se calla. Cada árbol que crece, un aire que sana. Unidos sabemos nuestra casa humana. tener aire y agua pura, es tener salud y una vida segura. Nunca olvides que el agua es vida. Protege nuestros bosques de tarequía. Mujeres de pie, nunca de rodillas. Mujeres de pie, nunca de rodillas. Mujeres siempre firmes. Mujeres siempre firmes. Fusil, metralla, chiquiaca, no se calla. Chiquiaca, no se calla. No se calla. Iedereen. No se calla. Dankjewel. Land of Bending is defending life. Yes.
Can the panel people from the panel just please come on the stage, and I will introduce the panel while you are coming and getting set up. How many are we? 4? Okay. So, why do we have to talk about climate on the day that is about racism and fascism? And in the middle of a genocide, why do we have to talk about climate? Why there has to be a climate block? It's because the point of today is to really show that it's all way more interconnected and linked than we think it is. These issues that we seem to think, oh, here is climate, here is Palestine, and here is worker rights, here is women rights, and they are all these blocks, and it's the capitalist society that has created these blocks, but actually this is all just one systemic issue. So that's why we want to include and talk about climate, also in this day against racism and fascism. So I want to first introduce our panelists, or maybe they can introduce themselves. That's better. So you can just pass them.
Okay, introduce who we are.
Who you are and your organization.
So it's already the law.
No, we do that next. Okay.
Yes. Okay, I'm Maya. I am from, I am doing actions with XR, and I'm in the Stop Fossil Subsidies campaign team. So, yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Lida. I'm part of Dead for Climate. We are a climate justice movement that looks at the intersection between the climate crisis and the debt crisis.
Hello everyone, I'm Yip, also part of Dead for Climate.
My name is Lucas Winnips, part of the Stop Fossil Fuel Subsidies campaign, just like Maya, mostly known from the 8/12 blockades. And thank you very much, Kranti, for organizing this and inviting us. Really great work that you do. also within Extinction Rebellion. Thank you.
There is one mic over there. I hope that works so we don't have to.
Can you just quickly explain what that means?
Yes, so we are gonna get into, we're like, what's debt, why we here, what's fossil subsidies, why we here, and why are we talking about it as part of this block. So that's what we are gonna get into. So greatly timed question. Okay, so maybe that just sets the tone. So I am first going to ask one of you to explain what is debt and why should we care about it.
I think the best way to introduce what we focus on as a movement is to kind of start by talking about an example of a country that's in a debt crisis, and that country is Suriname. So when we're talking about debt crisis, we're talking debt like money, financial debt, not debt. It gets confusing sometimes in English. So right now, over 50 countries in the global south, countries that were formerly colonized, are in a debt crisis. So that means that they spend almost 30%, sometimes 40% of their government budget on paying financial debt. So it means that they spend so much money on paying debt that they can no longer fund healthcare, no longer fund education. In the case of Suriname, right now Suriname pays 1/3 of its government budget just on paying back debt. But the key point in this story is that this debt is extremely profitable to the people, to the lenders. So while Suriname is paying back this debt and cannot invest in healthcare or education, commercial lenders actually have already made 80% profit on the original debt. Meanwhile, this debt continues to have to be paid back for the next 50 years. And this is also because the interest rates, so the price of the debt is very high. So this is one clear intersection between this debt crisis and the climate crisis, in the sense that money that should go into funding sustainable development for the people instead serves to enrich the capitalist elite. But it doesn't end there, because this debt is also used as an instrument of control. In the case of Suriname, it means that the IMF has imposed austerity. It's cuts on public subsidies, cuts on subsidies for fuel, for electricity. The whole healthcare system has collapsed. And also, this debt has to be repaid, and it has to be repaid in foreign currency, in dollars. So to ensure that the creditors will get back their money, Suriname has now made a deal with the oil giant Total, the French company, that all the future revenue of potential oil at the coast of Suriname will go to the creditors. And so this 30% of all the future oil revenue. So we see here that the debt, first of all, robs countries of the resources they have to fund basic social development and also ensure a just transition. But it's also an instrument that just leads to more extractive things, while all we want is to have these fossil fuels stay in the ground and put an end to the climate crisis. And now Yip will say a few more words on what we do as a movement.
Yeah, before I will do that, I want to ask you a question, and that is, what do you feel when you think about that? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. A few minutes. Yeah, and schuld in Dutch. What do you feel when you think about this? might be that feelings of guilt pop up, because this is a word that is having this in Dutch, for instance, schuld has the meaning of both guilt and debt. It could be that feelings of stress arise because you have the risk, what happens if I don't pay back my debt, or like a sense of moral obligation to pay back your debts. But it's also important to see the debt as a power relation. It's a debt between a creditor and a debtor. And if we look at the story, what Lida just shared, it's often that these debts are not legitimate, they're illegitimate. And I will give you 4 reasons for that. One of them is that often these debts that have been given to global south countries were given to dictators, so they have not been used in the benefit for the people. They have been often already paid back many times, but because of this interest rate, they have to keep on paying and keep on paying. At the same time, also, if we look at the climate crisis, then you see that there's a very large climate debt of the countries of the north towards the countries of the south. And this is not really being discussed when we talk about these financial debts that are being paid. And then lastly, and most importantly, there is a colonial debt. And like if we look at the case of Suriname, the Netherlands has colonized Suriname, but there has not been reparations for this. So this is a debt that is also not being paid. So with Debt for Climate, we are facing the question of who owes whom. And it's not the countries of the south that owes the countries of the north, but the countries of the north that owes the countries of the south. And therefore, as Debt for Climate, we're saying that cancellation of the global south is the first step towards achieving self-determination and a just transition for countries of the global south. And it is a first step, and it's a very important first step. But what we need is a full economic transformation of the economic system and a new international economic order.
And so Suriname is an example here, but all global south countries struggle with debt. In Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South America, all countries that have history of colonization struggle with this debt. So we use Suriname as an example, but it's a far wide-reaching topic. I'm going to ask the XR team to introduce what fossil subsidies are and what impact do they have on our society and as an individual.
Fossil subsidies. When I say this term, often people think that a subsidy is actually the government giving money, but actually in subsidies are mostly tax reductions for fossil fuel companies. So it is actually that these companies have to pay a lot less for their energy or for than you and I have to pay for, and they use a lot of fossil fuels to make profits, and these profits go to the shareholders, and while we all pay taxes and pay for our healthcare, these fossil fuel companies, they do a lot of damage, and mostly this damage is caused climate catastrophes in the global south. So that is actually where the damages then end of these fossil subsidies. And now, first the government denied that they actually gave out these subsidies, but after a while they said, oh, it's 4 billion, and then even later they said it's tenfold that amount. It is actually around 40 billion euros that are given to fossil fuel companies in terms of tax introductions each year. So that is, a lot of money going the wrong direction and causing tremendous climate injustice. And the consequences are felt the most in the global south, where we see these catastrophes daily. So yeah.
Just as why we are doing it a little bit, because I'm from this community called Rebels of Color, and we are an exclusive group of people of color within XR. So to protect ourselves and build our own community, we made a community within XR because it's very white dominated, and we want XR to focus more on solidarity and placing issues about climate in the context which is more in solidarity with the global south. So that's why I really wanted to build this connection of fossil subsidies and debt cancellation, because there is 40 billion that is there in our society, which we are using to destroy the global south, to encourage slavery. And these fossil companies are deeply rooted in colonialist ideologies. First fossil companies were colonial empires. In Indonesia, Shell, if you look at its beginnings, they are colonial missions. If you look at Exxon, same. If you look at BP, same. This is not just fossil subsidies, these are colonial subsidies. Because you are financing the destruction of a land and none of the profit goes to them. So with that, now you've had a basic introduction. Now I also want to encourage, if someone wants to go to the white supremacy workshop, you can do that. It's okay. I know it sucks that there are parallel sessions, but just to put it out there. Okay, so is the other topics clear to everyone? Do you understand now what debt is and what are fossil subsidies? Or is there a question about it if it's not clear? Because now we will go more into links between the topics and how there can be some working together. But if the topics are not clear, then it can be hard. So anyone wants to ask a question, or if something's not clear? Okay, then we move on. So then I will ask Lucas the question. What do you think is missing about the fossil subsidies campaign? Well, do you feel something is missing?
Yes, I think there are a whole lot of people missing, joining the struggle, so to say. And I think that's not only the struggle to stop fossil fuel subsidies, but as you said before, it's a broader struggle. Climate justice, to say it shortly. And I think everybody should care, and everybody, if they're able to, should join. So, yeah, let's say 100,000 people are missing. And I think one of the parallels between debt and fossil fuel subsidies, Lida explained it last week, and you get a sense of injustice. It's a perverse system, just like fossil fuel subsidies. And it may sound strange, but I think that's also the feeling of injustice is also part of what mobilizes people to join. So I think it would be really good if we get the debt theme more to the forefront of what we do. I always think that the solutions aren't the problem. You can think of ways how we should be doing them. That's not really, maybe not even interesting for at least not for me as an activist. It's more like putting on the agenda the injustice. And I think that we can find each other and make it a broader movement for climate justice.
Definitely. And I also think, like, if you now look at these countries, these global south countries, they could really use this money because they are suffering the effects of climate change now. like not even now, already since the last 20 years. Pakistan is now, most of it is uninhabitable from the floods, and it's only gonna get worse. And most of the island nations are also now uninhabitable because of the rising sea levels. And these people have nowhere to go, and they cannot rebuild. So this enormous amount of our wealth that we are giving to subsidizing fossil companies, to visualize what we can do with it is a powerful thing to introduce, even if we don't exactly know how that could look in practice. Okay, so then I will ask my next question to Debt for Climate. How do you think that the message of debt can be brought to the forefront?
I mean, as Debt for Climate, we also call ourselves like a movement of movements, which was also pointed out by Kanti at the beginning of this session, that you have the labor movement, the feminists, the climate movement, the Palestinian movement, but all these struggles are interconnected. And if we look at the issue of financial debt, it's very evident that it's all connected. So let's speak about fossil subsidies. When we're speaking about fossil subsidies, we're actually asking a question about public finance and who controls our public finance and who decides what that money is spent on. And I think Lucas mentioned it a couple of minutes ago while we were still talking, that the papers of Shell and the relations that Shell has with the government are still not released. These are negotiations that are happening behind closed doors, that decisions are being made about how our tax money is spent. But this issue is not just limited to the Netherlands, it's part of like a global dark financial network that is going into funding of more fossil fuel, more extractivism, and all that money is going into the pockets of the financial elite. And this is reflected in all the struggles. What you see is that these the way decisions are being made is very intransparent and not democratic. And Kranti just mentioned Pakistan, for example. So we can also talk again about the IMF. So the IMF is giving all these policy recommendations on how countries should use their public finance. In the case of Pakistan, is that Pakistan had these floods, but it's also drowning in debt. And instead of giving debt relief or canceling the debt, the IMF demanded during the pandemic that Pakistan should cut its social spending, cut its subsidies for healthcare, just to pay back this debt. So in this way, everything is kind of coming back together in this question of our public finance and who controls it, and how much power do we really have in that matter. I'll leave it at that for now. Maybe.
Yeah, I would still like to add maybe something that I guess to bring that to the forefront, it's also a matter of daring to start talking about these economic systems, because it feels sometimes quite scary when you're not used to using this language, and then it feels so complex. But I guess just like trying to have conversations with people close to you about this, what it means, because that is such an essential part of our economic system. It is already at the forefront, but we just have to start seeing that. And maybe a good example to give of that is that the money that we use every day, 97% of that is created as debt. And this is debt created by private banks. So private banks have the power in our society to decide what is useful to spend money on, to what debt can be handed out for. So I think that this is also something that is important to recognize.
When you talk about bringing teams to the foreground, disruptive actions are a really good means to do that, and I think the A12 blockade is a good example. When we started out, not many people had heard of fossil fuel subsidies, and the last time I checked, it was 60% of people were for stopping fossil fuel subsidies. So that is definitely something that can be done also with the debt team. So I think that's really an opportunity. And to make it, you had a nice concrete number, to make it tangible what we as society spend on fossil fuel subsidies. It's around 5,000 euros per household per year that you not literally pay, but let's say pay for fossil fuel subsidy. And imagine what you can do with that 5,000 euros in relation to the debt crisis.
Yeah, for sure. Disruptive action. I am always up for disruptive action, personally. I'm thinking of the targets and tactics, and we can really bring this message of debt cancellation to the forefront. Also, if you just look at the genocide, I mean, fossil companies were built on the genocide of indigenous peoples, and Palestinian people are also indigenous peoples. And the same fossil companies, like if you have read The Economy of the Genocide by Francesca Albanese, she says there is a genocide because it pays really well. Israel's economy is actually doing really well right now. There is huge investments they have been receiving from all kinds of companies because for them, Palestine is like an open playground to test anything. Mars surveillance, we will make it happen. And the same Mars surveillance technologies are then used on us. So, and if you look at fossil companies like BP, they want to drill gas in Palestine. So, this issue, all these issues are so connected, and that's why we have to work together. So, in the sense of working together, what do you think can be some joint targets on the prospect of fossil subsidies and also on the prospect of debt cancellation?
Well, the fossil subsidies campaign always focused on our government, and I think there are also that we can also demand of our government to act on this debt crisis as well, and to cancel any colonial debt, or to make repairment payments to the tremendous amount of damage that our government did. And but I'm also curious what you guys think. This is something I could think of.
Yeah, I think we have the same thoughts, because as Debt for Climate, we demand the cancellation of debt, with the idea also that this debt needs to be used for a just climate transition everywhere in the world. So it's not just about canceling debt, it's also about providing climate finance, not in the form of more loans, but in the form of grants, which is something that our government can clearly do. Another target is also about how our government continues to also contribute to the debt issue, which happens through export credit agencies. These are agencies that lend money to often extractive projects abroad. So we're talking about fossil subsidies here. That's also a form of fossil subsidy. It's providing tax incentives, whether it's here or in, for example, Mozambique, for companies to come in, including Dutch companies, to extract the resources there So basically it's an investment in an overseas fossil project. But then when this investment doesn't turn out as was expected, the burden of it is shifted to the local population, while the Dutch investors take out their money and benefit. So I think starting with the role of the Dutch government is a really good shared point and shared target that we have.
But what about the creditors and the lenders and the banks themselves? Because they are the ones that make these ridiculous rules about interest rates, and they are the ones that decide when to give the money, when to pull the money, what to support and what not to support.
Yeah, so talking about the creditors, if we're still talking about also like as a possible target, the Dutch government. The Dutch government itself does not have loans to Global South countries, but the Dutch government is represented in the International Monetary Fund and in the World Bank. And the Minister of Finance, Ilko Heijnen, is currently the representative in the World Bank. And Klaas Knot, who is the president of the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch Central Bank, he is representing the Netherlands in the IMF. And these two institutions, international institutions, they do hold Global South debt. And besides holding Global South debt, they also shape the international debt architecture. And that is maybe even more important than holding the debt itself, because they decide on what kind of reforms countries should do to be able to borrow money, to be able to educate their citizens, to provide healthcare, and since we have an economy that runs on debt, we need to be able to borrow money to be able to invest in our economy. So when the IMF and the World Bank are deciding on how the economies of the world should run, and then maybe it's good to know like these institutions are not democratic at all. They're based on how big your economy is, and the bigger your economy is, the more voting power you have. So for instance, the Dutch, if you calculate what the power of a Dutch person is in the IMF compared to an Indonesian person, we have 29 times more power inside the IMF. So this is not a democratic institution. Maybe that's also good to know.
Just ask a question, what happens to a country if it doesn't pay back that debt?
Yeah,
Because I mean, they all could just fuck it.
That's a very good question. And then there's different ways to achieve this Global South debt cancellation, like the repudiation of debt, that is a strategy that has been pursued. But it's a dangerous route in some way. I don't know whether you're familiar with Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, and he tried to organize a united front against that in the 80s, if I'm correct, but he was assassinated a month after giving this speech about a united front against that. Wow. And it's really difficult to create this united front against that, because it's in the interest of powerful nations like the Netherlands to keep on extracting wealth and keep on extracting resources from the Global South for the benefit of the capitalist class here.
Are there more questions? Because we have now 5 minutes left. So, and I think it's very important that we as audience understand these links, because if this will become a thing, then we will expect people like you to show up, show solidarity, and then if you don't understand what you're doing there, then there is no campaign. So because without you and your understanding of these issues, there is nothing. So your understanding of these issues is everything. So who wants to ask a question?
Ik wil graag in het Nederlands spreken.
Zeker mag.
Ik vind het jammer dat we nog steeds over dit thema in Nederland Engels spreken. Ja. Mensen van de straat willen in het Nederlands spreken. Dit is geen toeristisch issue. Dit gaat over ons leven en onze verantwoordelijkheden in het totaal systeem. Ik ben vanaf 2019 tot 2021 lid van XR geweest en in massa-acties meegedaan. En daarna ben ik van XR weggegaan. Mijn vraag gaat over esthetiek van XR. De organisatie die niet vanuit complexe systemen in die tijd de zaken zag. En van daaruit, enerzijds moesten we wachten tot Londen iets beslist. Dan komt naar landelijke bijeen, XR, sorry. En dan van daaruit, wij hadden zelf lokale Amsterdamse setting, acties en observaties, wat in ons eigen ecosysteem in Amsterdam gaande was. En dat werd afgekeurd omdat vanuit Londen was niet opdracht gegeven. Het was niet autonoom, het was niet systeemverbonden aan lokale behoeftes. En er was een bureaucratische houding. Ik ben vertrokken, ik ben zelf complexe systeemwetenschapper en artiest. En met mij zijn 30 migranten dat ik had verzameld, allemaal vertrokken. Door witte suprematie en racisme en door deze hiërarchische organisatievorm, die werd als een plattevorm verbeeld. Ja, als architect weet ik, plattegrond van een gebouw van 100 verdiepingen en min 1 is hetzelfde. Maar doe doorsnee, dan zie je, is hiërarchisch of niet. Ik zie in jullie taal dat nu niet meer angst narratief is, maar veel meer rechtvaardigheid. Het gaat heel erg over circulatie van het systeem. En dat is goede winst. Dat is wat ik voor vocht. En ik kreeg geen stem daarvoor. Ik werd bestreden. En als migrant door mijn accent neergezet. Ze hebben mij en anderen kwijtgeraakt. En altijd wordt gezegd, migranten hebben geen gevoel voor, maar migranten hebben allereerst de behoefte aan rechtvaardiging, ook in kleine cirkels. Dus er is geweldige ontwikkeling, als ik naar jullie kijk. Maar is die esthetiek veranderd? De vorm van hiërarchische organisatie zitten kijken als onwetende mensen, geen burgers, wat Londen zegt en gaan we copy-pasten hier. Dat is één. De tweede, de vorm van acties, waar ik zelf moest af en toe dood liggen op de grond in mijn 65-jarige leeftijd, was echt niet comfortabel, het was niet mooi en ik zag dat iedereen kijkt van wat is met jou aan de hand? Hebben jullie ook aan gedacht, hoe socialiseren wij deze gigantische behoefte van de samenleving? En ik zie ook een arrogantie dat klimaatstrijd niet zichzelf ziet als onderdeel van bewegingen allemaal. Ik ben kandidaat nummer 8 van bijeen en ik vecht nog steeds voor ecosociale transformatie. Dat is wat wij allemaal nodig hebben. De vraag aan jullie.
Thank you. First of all, it's really a shame that you...
Lucas, jij mag een beter in Nederlands houden.
Oh, sorry. Nou, ten eerste...
Super.
Ja, dankjewel. Heel erg jammer dat je weg bent gegaan. En juist jouw energie, die je nu ook laat zien, is super hard nodig binnen XR. Ja, ik hoop dat je misschien nog een keer wilt overwegen om terug te komen, want precies wat je zelf zegt is super hard nodig dat we echt met z'n allen ervoor gaan. Wat je zegt over de hiërarchie, ja, ik moet gewoon eerlijk zeggen, ik ben best wel heel goed bekend met XR vanaf 2019. Ik herken het totaal niet. Het is namelijk...
op de top.
Dat zal het zijn. Laat ik het anders zeggen, toen wij begonnen met de fossiele subsidiescampagne, was het gewoon een groepje van 5 mensen. We zijn dit gewoon gaan doen. En er is nooit enige sprake geweest van dat kan niet. En ook bijvoorbeeld de A12-blokkade. Ik denk, ja, dat zijn we gewoon gaan doen. Dus niemand die zei van, dat mag je niet doen. Want zo, dat hebben we ook met elkaar afgesproken. We gaan niet, ieder is autonoom. Dus als je een actie wil doen, moet je dat gewoon kunnen doen. Dus er is niets misgegaan, maar ik weet niet wat. Het is in ieder geval niet de bedoeling dat het zo gaat.
Ja, dus ook, ik snap het, ik snap je rage en ik voel het. Maar er is ook, we zijn bijna, de tijd is wel klaar. Dus
Nog één dingje over de esthetiek. Ja, helemaal. Dat sluit eigenlijk heel mooi aan, want als jij denkt van ik vind dat zo'n daaien op de grond liggen niet goed, ga je lekker wat anders doen. En er is niemand die je tegen gaat houden als jij zegt, ik wil het op een andere esthetische manier doen. Daar is volgens mij alle ruimte voor. En ja, ik hoop dat je dat alsnog dan kan gaan doen. En de uitnodiging is echt denken dat het beter kan, anders, gewoon doen. En power to you. En ik hoop dat je energie weer gaat inzetten voor XR. En
Beweging van
issues.
bewegingen.
Ja.
Een beweging van bewegingen.
Daarin is denk ik ook heel erg nodig in die beweging van bewegingen. Ja, ik vind het heel. Ik was zelf nog niet actief bij XR toen u erbij zat. Maar ik vind het heel, ja, heel erg om te horen eigenlijk. En er is altijd. We vechten. Dat staat ook in onze kernwaarden. We vechten tegen dat hiërarchische systeem. Maar het lukt niet altijd, want wij zijn ook helemaal opgegroeid in een kolonialistische, kapitalistisch denkende samenleving. En ook binnen XR merk je dat gewoon heel erg. Dus er is echt een gebrek aan diversiteit en we moeten soms echt daaraan werken, denk ik. Van hoe zorgen we dat we wel iedereen erbij betrekken en dat we iedereen, dat we erkennen dat we niet... dat we onderdeel zijn van dat systeem en van die beweging en ook hoe dat hiërarchische dus ook in ons zit en hoe we dat zelf kunnen.
Het is ook internalized.
Ja.
Oké. Ik sluit deze sessie af met dat ik was de eerste in XR met de Palestina actie in Rotterdam. We deden een vlagprojectie. Ik krijg veel hate van XR mensen. Over waarom hebben jullie dit gedaan, het is complex topic, bla bla bla. Ik deed het toch. En ik roep in Palestina op R12. Mensen kwamen tegen mij, roep je alsjeblieft hier niet over Palestina. Ik deed het toch. Dus XR is op een weg om, de cultuur is op de weg om te veranderen. Het is er nog steeds niet. Als je me vraagt, is XR antiracist en solidair? Nog niet. Maar het is op de weg. En daarom blijf ik voel best alleen soms, maar ik blijf het doen. Dat hopelijk komt een moment dat mensen met kleur ook een plek in XR vinden.
Jij kunt Nederlands goed spreken. Als jouw Nederlands niet goed is en jij bent eerste generatie, grote massa jonge mensen denken, accent hier is accent hier.
Ja, ik doe het met een Nederlands accent.
Dat heb ik 2 jaar bestreden. En over jou, ik moet dit punt delen. Corona plaatsvond. Ik leefde in Zuid en ik zag dat voedselbanken stoppen. Mensen zitten zonder documentatie in honger. Ik heb meteen een plan gemaakt. Hoe gaan wij een stad veilig stellen om coronagevaar voorbij te gaan? Ik heb een plan geschreven van aanpak. Wat de gemeente moest doen. En zij hebben bij één werd gezegd, Londen heeft geen opdracht gegeven, doen we niet. En voor mij was, get it, ik ga gewoon met mensen doen. En ik heb het gedaan, maar niet namens XR, dat verdiende XR niet.
Ja, hopelijk in de toekomst er komt een moment dat wij het anders voelen. Als er mensen van de Freedom Fighters hier zijn, alsjeblieft op de stage komen. Ik wil even jullie gezichtjes laten zien. En dan, wij sluiten deze ronde af. Dankjewel voor onze geweldige sprekers. Nu is er weer een pauze met thee en koffie en tijd.